And here we are, week number 22, and today we will wrap up the first 12 verses of chapter 2, which is the wedding at Cana. And from last week, what we talked about, here's some summary thoughts. Through his inaugural ministry event, which is the wedding at Cana, Jesus is pointing to something much larger than the event itself. So this actually is the basis for my approach on teaching this story. There's something greater than the story, and the supportive idea is in that second sentence. This assumption is reinforced by his response to his mother. When she informs him the wine is gone, he directs the immediate focus to a much larger future framework. He says, "Woman, my hour has not yet come." I mean, he's taking the immediate need for wine and he's casting it in a much larger and future framework. So that's what's informed my thoughts in sharing my thoughts with you guys. So let's one more time, let's read this text. If somebody could read verses 1 through 12, just to refresh our minds.
On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you."
Good idea.
Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rite of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drank freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs. Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days.
Okay, Bob, thanks for reading that. So this is review from last week, and I'm going to move through this very, very quickly. Again, this is my attempt to share with you what I think could be the larger framework of the story. And so I asked this last week, what's this all about? And I think that one of the key ideas in this whole thing is purification. The 6 pots, the filling of the pots. I think that all has bearing on this story. It would have been normal for a home like this to have, I'm assuming it was in a home, not a hall of some sort, I don't know. It seems like it was in someone's house. It would be normal to have one stone pot, a 30 or 20 or 30 gallon pot that would probably be positioned to collect rainwater, because part of the process of Jewish ceremonial purification, the water had to be what was called living water. It had to be some sort of natural water, either a flowing river or collected by rain, or it had to be some sort of movement in that water. And so when Jesus is commands the servants to fill those pots, my goodness, they would have been reminded of this idea of purification. And so that there is where my thoughts came. And if there is this idea of purification, the predecessor to purification is guilt. You know, there is dirtiness there. And so what their mind, their framework of living would have been is guilt. This would have been a continual process in their lives of they're in a stage of guilt or dirtiness and they need purification. And this purification was a daily thing that reminded them of the fact that they needed constant purification. And through the purification process, they were then made clean. But then because of the guilt, it just returns back again. And so there's this way of thinking that is not unlike our way of thinking. We are in a stage of dirtiness and we need to be made pure. And that would have been, in my mind, how they would have thought about this action that was taking place. And so what I taught last week is that Jesus enters the middle of this human condition right here that I've laid out. There's Jesus, and what happens is that this entire process collapses into Jesus and collapses into him. And then what do I have next here? So through this inaugural ministry event, two things here. Jesus demonstrates that this universal human condition, this cycle, is now moving from a state of constant lack to a state of maximum provision. I mean, and we're going to get to a little bit more here in just a minute, but lack to a state of maximum provision. He turns water into wine. Amazing. So, and then secondly, he transforms the purification process by converting the ordinary into the extraordinary, water into wine. Now, I'm moving very quickly because I want to give us table time. And so, for the second time, I'm asking to the text, what is this all about? And so, we're going to get it a little closer to home. I'd like you to imagine yourself as a guest participating in this joyous occasion, a wedding, one of the most joyous occasions that we experience as human beings in our relationships. And you're walking around the wedding reception, and you're mingling with old friends and possibly relatives, and you have a glass of wine, and you're sipping the wine, and you're catching up on the latest. Now, imagine yourself and the others walking around with empty glasses. And you're walking around with empty glasses because there's no more wine. And I think that is a metaphor for the human condition. There is a desire and a joyousness about being alive here, that God has given us the gift of life. But there's always in the background something lacking. And the wine runs out. And that is our experience in being humans. It's almost perfect, but very seldom, if ever, is it absolutely perfect. The wine runs out. So, imagine yourself at a dinner party seeing a whole room full of people with empty glasses. There's something, tragic, but kind of disheartening about that scene. So now continue to imagine seeing the staff fill the stone pots and with water, and they had to come in. Okay, 30 gallons each. 20 times 6, that's 120. You're talking 120, 150 gallons of water that had to move from one place to another place. And you could only carry, 5 to 7 gallons at a time. So there were several trips bringing this water in. And as you see the water being poured, in a Jewish culture, your mind would have gone to purification. living water. Living water purifies. And in fact, this idea would have dramatically been reinforced by the sheer volume of the water, the 120 to 150 gallons being poured. All 6 pots were filled. Now, there's a lot out there about the number of pots, and I kind of like the idea, again, tying this to the Old Testament way of, the history of Israel, the 6 representing a culmination to a point of change. There were 6 days of creation where it was done, and then it culminated into the Sabbath rest. And why couldn't it been, I'm just suggesting, is 6 representing something larger here than just randomly 6 pots, but reinforcing the idea that something greater is about to happen through the presence of Jesus Christ, through that opening of the window there. Just idea and no charge for that idea. Now imagine watching the dipping into one of the pots. You're watching this, the tasting, or the transferring of what the liquid is to the head waiter, and the tasting, and then his testimony, and finally everyone has a full glass. You move from a glass, a joyous occasion, to a disheartening reality, to now a joyful, full reality, and even the best for last. Okay, do you get the idea? This is something greater than the story itself. It's pointing to something. That something greater is Jesus, the presence of God Almighty, the incarnate one, now has changed everything. He has changed everything. And his presence is changing everything in that moment, and in that joyous occasion, that almost joyous occasion, he turns it into something extraordinary. So could it be that this was in mind? This is the story out of Ezekiel, or actually a vision of Ezekiel, chapter 47, 1 through 12. It's the last vision that begins in chapter 40 of what is called the millennial temple. There's a future reality that Israel was looking forward to. And the 7 chapters in Ezekiel is transported to Jerusalem during a devastating time, and God gives him a grander vision of what will happen. And in this last section of the vision, there's a trickle flowing out from underneath the temple, a trickle of water. And the man with Ezekiel says, go out and walk 1,000 cubits, and they measure the water as it flows out from the temple. And if any of you have been there, this thing flows east, and there is nothing east of the temple. Well, the Mount of Olives, but after that, it is stark desert all the way to the Dead Sea. And there are no tributaries to this stream. We're used to tributaries here. We're used to seeing rivers flow together and creating larger streams, but that is not the case here. But what is happening here is there's this temple on the Temple Mount, and this trickle of stream, and as it moves eastward and downward, it gets larger. There is, first of all, ankle deep, and then another 1,000 cubits, and now it's knee deep, and another 1,000 cubits, and it's loin deep, and it's flowing, and wherever the river is, there is life, and there's fish in the river, and there are trees. This is what all this is saying right here in this 12 verses. And it's a picture, and can it be a picture of the living water, the temple that has now come in the incarnate Word, and he's going to give life. And he's saying it's not going to happen, it is here. And in this inaugural time, in this event, in this wedding, he makes this picture come true. And I'm just saying because of their Jewish heritage, and they would have been very familiar with this story. Could this have been one of the stories that they thought about during that time as they watched the pouring of the water? So I'd like for us to, at our tables for the remainder of the time, to dial this in to home. And the way I would like for us to do this is I'd like you to think about your experience and ask yourself and tell the others around your table answers to 2 questions. Where and how have you experienced in your life transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary? This is what Jesus is all about, and this is what his kingdom is all about. Transformation, ordinary to extraordinary. Secondly, how has, in your experience, how have you experienced transformation from a state of lack to a state of abundance? So let's have some fun with this, and then I'll get us back together in about 10 minutes, and we'll kind of process that out. So.